The War of 1812 is often overshadowed by the American Revolution and the Civil War, two conflicts that dominate the American historical imagination. Yet, the War of 1812 played a crucial role in shaping the destiny of the young United States, testing its resolve and unity at a time when its future was far from certain. For the fledgling nation, this war was more than just another military struggle. It was a defining moment that would help determine whether the ideals of independence and self-government could truly endure. The conflict itself was sprawling and chaotic, stretching across vast and varied landscapes. Battles erupted on the high seas, on the Great Lakes, deep within dense forests, and through the winding bayous of the South. No corner of the young nation was untouched by the turmoil. The war was declared against the mighty British Empire, which at the time was already locked in a titanic struggle with Napoleon's France. The causes of the war were complex and deeply intertwined with global events. Among the most pressing grievances were the British practice of impressing American sailors into their navy, harsh trade restrictions that strangled American commerce, and a sense of national humiliation that many Americans felt could not be ignored. At the same time, there was a fierce and growing desire among Americans to expand westward, to claim new lands and opportunities, and to assert their place on the continent. For Americans, the war became a fight for honor, for survival, and for the right to determine their own destiny. It was a test of national character and unity. For the British, already stretched thin by war in Europe, the conflict in North America was a costly distraction, yet one they could not afford to ignore. For Native Americans, the war represented a last desperate stand to defend their homelands and way of life against relentless American expansion. And for Canadians, both British loyalists and French settlers, it was a fight to protect their homes, their communities, and their very identity from invasion. The war tested a fragile nation whose military was small and largely untested, and whose people were deeply divided over whether war was the right path. Political factions clashed, and uncertainty reigned in the halls of Congress. Over the course of 3 tumultuous years, the fate of North America hung in the balance. Battles raged from the Canadian border to the swamps of New Orleans, with each side fighting for its own vision of the continent's future. This is the story of a war that redefined a continent, forged a new American identity, and left a legacy that still echoes through history today. The U.S. aimed to strike Britain's weak point, Canada, believing it was the Achilles heel of the British Empire in North America. The American leadership thought that by capturing Canada, they could force Britain to negotiate favorable terms. They believed it would be an easy conquest, expecting minimal resistance from the Canadian population, and assuming that British forces would be too preoccupied with the ongoing Napoleonic Wars in Europe. However, American leaders underestimated the challenge. They anticipated that Canadians would welcome them as liberators, but this was a grave miscalculation. The British forces, though stretched thin, were not as distracted as the Americans hoped. Britain's initial strategy was defense, relying on a small but well-coordinated force, Canadian militia, and crucial alliances with Native American tribes. These alliances were pivotal in bolstering their defensive capabilities. The Royal Navy played a critical role by blockading the American coast, effectively strangling trade and containing the U.S. Navy within its own harbors, which severely hampered American efforts. Native American leaders like Tecumseh saw the war as a last chance to resist American expansion. They allied with the British, hoping to defend their lands and preserve their way of life against the encroaching American settlers. Geography played a decisive role in shaping the war. The dense forests, few roads, and vast distances made military campaigns slow and supply lines vulnerable to attack and disruption. Control of waterways, especially the Great Lakes, was vital for moving troops and supplies. These waterways were the lifelines of the war effort, determining the success or failure of military operations. The war became a series of local battles for control of forts and strategic routes. These skirmishes, rather than sweeping campaigns, defined the conflict, with each side vying for control of key positions. Ultimately, geography, more than grand plans or strategies, dictated the war's course. The rugged terrain and challenging conditions often overshadowed the ambitions of both sides, shaping the outcome of the conflict in unexpected ways. The American plan to conquer Canada quickly unraveled into disaster. Poor coordination, Untrained militias and overconfident generals doomed the three-pronged invasion. General Hull's advance from Detroit collapsed after psychological tactics by British General Brock and Tecumseh. Hull surrendered Detroit without a fight. At Queenston Heights, American forces briefly crossed into Canada, but New York militia refused to follow, leaving the attackers isolated and forced to surrender. Despite Brock's death, the British and their native allies held firm. These failures exposed the weakness of relying on militias and untested officers. While the U.S. Navy scored some victories at sea, the land campaign was a catastrophe. The dream of quick victory died. America was now on the defensive. The war in the North became a grinding struggle, far from the easy conquest promised. With Napoleon defeated in 1814, Britain unleashed its full power on America. The British launched a three-part offensive invading from Canada, blockading and raiding the Atlantic coast, and targeting New Orleans. In August 1814, British troops marched into Washington, D.C., burning public buildings in retaliation for the American burning of York. The burning of Washington shocked the nation, but galvanized American resolve. Instead of breaking American spirit, it united the country. The British then targeted Baltimore, a far more strategic city. The defense of Baltimore would prove a turning point. The war's outcome now hung in the balance. In the Old Northwest, control of the Great Lakes was crucial. The British, holding Detroit, dominated Lake Erie with a small squadron. Young U.S. Navy officer Oliver Hazard Perry built a fleet from scratch at Presque Isle, Pennsylvania. On September 10, 1813, Perry's fleet met the British near Put-in-Bay, Ohio. Perry's flagship, the USS Lawrence, was battered, but he refused to surrender. He famously rowed to the USS Niagara, raised his flag, and broke the British line with devastating broadsides. Within minutes, the British surrendered, the first time an entire British squadron was captured. Perry's message: "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." The victory secured American control of Lake Erie and shifted the war's momentum. The Great Lakes would never again be a British stronghold. After burning Washington, the British targeted Baltimore, a vital port and privateer haven. British commanders planned a land and sea assault. General Ross would attack by land while Admiral Cochrane's fleet bombarded Fort McHenry. Baltimore's defenses, led by General Samuel Smith, were strong and well prepared. The British land attack faltered when General Ross was killed. His troops stalled before the city's earthworks. The focus shifted to Fort McHenry, bombarded for 25 hours by the British fleet. Inside, Major Armistead and his defenders held firm. Watching from a truce ship, Francis Scott Key saw the fort's flag still flying at dawn. The British withdrew, defeated on land and sea. Inspired, Key wrote a poem that became the Star-Spangled Banner. Baltimore's stand became a symbol of American resilience. As peace talks continued, Britain launched a final assault on New Orleans, aiming to control the Mississippi. General Andrew Jackson, a fierce and unconventional leader, rallied a diverse force: regulars, militia, free men of color, and even pirates. Jackson fortified his line along the Rodriguez Canal, forcing the British into a narrow, deadly approach. On January 8, 1815, British troops advanced in formation, only to be devastated by American riflemen and artillery. The battle was over in half an hour, over 2,000 British casualties, including General Pakenham, versus fewer than 100 Americans. It was a stunning, one-sided victory for Jackson. Ironically, the Treaty of Ghent had already been signed, but news hadn't reached America. The victory electrified the nation and made Jackson a hero. New Orleans secured American control of the Mississippi. The war's final battle became its most legendary. The Battle of New Orleans and the peace treaty arrived almost simultaneously, creating the enduring myth of a sweeping American victory. News of the treaty had not yet reached the battlefield, so the triumph felt decisive, even though the war's outcome was already sealed by diplomacy. The war's end sparked a surge of patriotism across the United States, uniting a once-divided nation and ushering in what became known as the Era of Good Feelings. Americans celebrated their resilience, and a new sense of national pride swept through cities and rural communities alike. Yet, for Native Americans, the war brought disaster. Tecumseh's dream of a united indigenous confederacy was shattered, and with the British withdrawing their support, tribes across the Midwest and South were left exposed to relentless U.S. expansion. The loss marked a turning point, accelerating the erosion of native lands and sovereignty. The Federalist Party, already weakened by its opposition to the war and the ill-timed Hartford Convention, found its reputation irreparably damaged. The party soon collapsed, reshaping the American political landscape and paving the way for new voices and ideas. The Treaty of Ghent restored pre-war borders with no territory changing hands. Many of the issues that had sparked the conflict faded as Europe's wars ended with Napoleon's defeat. The peace was more a return to the status quo than a clear victory for either side. Yet the war secured American independence in the eyes of the world and launched Andrew Jackson's meteoric rise to national fame. His leadership at New Orleans made him a household name and set the stage for his future presidency. The conflict also solidified the US-Canada border, helping to foster a distinct Canadian identity. Canadians remembered their successful defense while Americans looked westward, both nations forging new paths. The war's contradictions, no clear winner but profound and lasting change, shaped the continent's future. It was a conflict marked by both division and unity, loss and opportunity. Once dismissed as a minor conflict, the War of 1812 proved pivotal in defining what it meant to be American. It tested the nation's resolve and inspired a new generation to imagine a united future. Its legacy endures in the words of the national anthem, in the peaceful border with Canada, and in the shared identities of two nations shaped by conflict and cooperation.